Hi, everybody. I'm Loren Molloy. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Loren Molloy Reads to You. Today, I'm going to read another chapter from The Bedtime Killer by me, Loren Molloy. If you haven't heard chapter 1, please pause this, go back to my channel, subscribe, turn on notifications when I go live. You'll be able to join me. And look for The Bedtime Killer by Loren Molloy so that you can get chapter 1 before we start chapter 2. Okay? So, if you've already heard chapter 1, then let's start chapter 2 of The Bedtime Killer by me, Loren Molloy. Chapter 2. Horace made it home to his room and pulled off his boots while starting to think, what the hell happened to him out there? He wasn't sure. It had started to happen occasionally. Thank goodness he wasn't driving when that happened. Horace assured himself it had been because his dates had been so unfulfilling lately. He had never desired to be closer to his lovers before, but lately, Horace felt his needs, desires, and even his fantasies changing and growing. All his adult life, he had made sure his relationships with his ladies had been look but don't touch. He never needed or wanted more than that. Now that had changed. He felt it. Horace used to fantasize about watching his lovers through their bathroom windows while they showered or got undressed. It was more than enough for little Horace. Now, the fantasies had become more physical, more violent. He was also starting to have terrible, horrible night terrors, like he hadn't had in so long, more than he could even remember. Each time he would wake up and only remember images of a green dumpster and a dirty caravan. He would wake up soaked in sweat, panicked, and out of breath. He had even begun wetting the bed again. None of it made sense to him. He was so sure he had moved past all of this. Horace knew he had to do something, and he had to do it soon because it had been too many times of little Horace not being satisfied by his lovers to be able to handle it any longer. Rage and frustration like he had never knew was filling within him. Horace started to pace back and forth inside his room for rent. A twin cot was in one corner, and a 3-drawer dresser with an old TV was adjacent to it. Across the room, there was a small Formica table with a battered old wooden chair with it. That, and Horace himself, was all that was able to fit in that room. His head almost brushed the ceiling as he walked back and forth from the bed to the table and back. The dingy old carpet had a distinct worn pattern in it from him constantly pacing there. He had always had a stocky build, but as he got into his late 30s, it seemed his shoulders were more broad and swallowed his neck. And the shoulders themselves began to become much more rounded and hunched over. He gave the impression of an ogre when looked at straight on. From the constant outdoor manual labor, his skin became a permanent, deep, leathery tan. Now that he's in his mid-40s, his skin became wrinkled, leather. His shoulders had a much more hunched look to them than ever before. Horace had maintained a buzz cut all these years, even though it had become more looking like a buzzed monk or friar's hairstyle, but no one would ever mistake Horace for a man of God. It also didn't help that his head was abnormally wider than it was long. His facial features were spread out too widely across that face, making him unnerving to look at, to say the least. He had one massive, protruding, hairy unibrow that overshadowed his eyes. His eyes were tiny specks of blue, which were set entirely too far apart. Underneath that was a huge, bulbous nose smashed flat and wide from it being broken on numerous occasions. It also didn't help that he had huge nostrils that seemed to always be flaring, and his breath continuously made a squeak sound like a rusty accordion. His mouth seemed to be stretched too wide for his face as well. His lips were too thin, making them look like emaciated worms lying under his nose. And when Horace smiled, He always appeared to be sneering at people. Even Horace's body was disproportionate. He had a long, wide torso and short, stumpy legs that made you wonder how he was able to stay standing. Altogether, to say Horace was one disturbing, grotesque mess of a person would be accurate. Horace knew what he looked like. He always knew his ladies adored him anyway. He thought of his Chantel and felt that old, familiar spark that started in his nether regions again. Yes, that was it. Horace lay down on his cot and quickly pulled little Horace from his zippered hiding place. He closed his eyes and began to fantasize about his lovely, beautiful lover, Chantal. It was late at night. Chantal's father was out. It was just him and her together. Not a word was spoken between them. She knew what her lover liked. Chantal was standing naked in the shower, the beads of water cascading down her bare flesh. She turned to get his favorite bar of soap from its shelf in the shower, giving Horace an amazing view of her tight ass and even a glimpse of her sweet private center. Little Horace couldn't take it anymore and demanded a closer view. Stepping through the open window, Horace was now only inches away from his beautiful naked lady. Horace moaned loudly, causing Chantal to turn around quickly, looking very startled. Being the sexy tease she was, Chantal began to scream out for help and tried to cover her exposed flesh with her tiny, delicate hands. Horace just chuckled and moved even closer. Little Horace needed more time. It was quite obvious how desperately he desired his hot lady. Horace reached out and tried to stroke one of Chantal's hard nipples. Chantal slapped Horace very hard, crying out even louder. Her eyes wide with fear, and her soft flesh was covered in goosebumps, causing Horace to become even more aroused. He couldn't wait another second. He had to have her right there and then. Horace grabbed Chantal by the throat. He began to choke her so hard it was making her eyes begin to bulge out of their sockets. Her pretty face was turning a gorgeous deep shade of red. Her feminine little hands were trying to claw and pull away Horace's hands from her throat. When that didn't work, Chantal clawed his face. It was all it did was turn him on even more. Chantal's lips were beginning to turn blue. Horace watched intently as the light left her sexy eyes. Only when Chantal stopped fighting him did he realize she had stopped breathing as well. The urge was much too much to control, and Horace didn't try. He pushed Chantal up against the shower wall and began making love to his lady. He didn't care that the water was still running. All that mattered was his lovemaking to his lady love. After many fast thrusts like a jackhammer's, Horace screamed out, "It's bedtime, baby!" Horace's eyes flashed open very quickly. It took several minutes for Horace to catch his breath and realize he was still in his room, not in Chantal's bedroom or bathroom. He was covered in his own semen and couldn't care. He knew what he needed. He just needed to be closer to his lovers. That is all. It was time, he decided. Horace had one major snag in the plan. He's never been to any of the houses after dark. No one wants the lawnmower running at night. It would also be highly suspect if it was running at night. Plus, Horace had no idea what the house's schedules were like during the evenings. Horace closed his eyes for a moment to catch his breath when an image of Chantal from the fantasy he just had flashed into his mind. He needed to visit her right then. That was it. He knew it. It took him a few moments to wipe up. Pulling his pants back up, Horace put little Horace back into his hiding spot and zipped him up. He was suddenly so excited. He grabbed his keys and went back out. Visions of Chantal were dancing in his head. He was too overcome, too obsessed with his visions, to think about anything other than Chantal. He knew he had no idea what this night's schedule was like, but he just didn't care either way. He had to see his darling lady. He didn't see the father's car, which was a good sign, again, that he didn't really check. He couldn't. All he could think of was that he had to see his lover's face. There weren't many lights on in the house. Horace was in luck, though. Chantal's bedroom light was on. She would make it all better. They would have an amazing date this time. Then he'd go home and finally get some real sleep. Horace scurried up the trellis once again and went to her window. There she was. Her hair was wet, hanging down loosely on the towel covering her body. Damn, he had just missed her nightly shower. Horace was in luck, though. He was just in time to watch her put on her body lotion. Chantal walked over to her vanity near the window where Horace was located and clipped up all her gorgeous, luxurious hair. She dropped the towel. Standing naked before the mirror, she proceeded to apply lotion to her long, lean, tanned legs. She put the lotion on her skin, and Horace shivered with lust again. Chantal knew what he liked. He could tell she just did, and it was working. Horace watched his beautiful lover while his fantasy began to mix with the reality before him. He held himself tightly in one hand and began to jerk himself and moan. Without the lawnmower to muffle him, Horace had no idea how loudly he was moaning Chantal's name until he opened his eyes and saw her freeze. She began to stare at the window. It took him time to realize what happened when their eyes locked for the first time. It was hard for Horace to figure out if it was reality or his fantasy. She began to scream out a blood-curdling, murderous sound that took him a minute to realize was the word help. It caused him to flash back to his fantasy of her crying out for help, making his reaction to her even more intense. Boy, did she have a great set of lungs on her, Horace thought, before the reality of what was happening caused him to lose his balance and fall backwards. Horace landed headfirst in a bush underneath Chantal's window. The shock and the pain of landing that way caused him to be unable to move for several moments. Suddenly, he heard Mr. Richardson coming towards him, screaming, "Who's out there? I'll fucking kill you, goddamn peeping fucking Tom." Horace only had a second to think to himself, "Guess he was home," before Horace could see the flashlight widely searching for him. It wasn't until that moment that Horace realized his pants were still around his ankles and his hairy ass was stuck up in the air. Branches and leaves from the bush were poking and stabbing his face. "You there! I'll kill you, you fucking peeping Tom! Sick, disgusting pervert! I'll teach you to look at my daughter!" Mr. Richardson bellowed. Horace unceremoniously flopped out of the bush with a sharp twist. He landed on his back, facing away from Mr. Richardson. Horace picked up his pants and ran for it. "Come back here! You're dead! Do you hear me? Dead, you fucking piece of shit!" Chantal's father screamed. Horace heard the cock of a shotgun and ran faster. He made it around the corner, back to his truck, and took off. Thank goodness Mr. Richardson was a very obese man, not to mention his severe chain smoking of cigars, causing him to wheeze and hack a lung at the slightest exertion. That was the main reason, besides Chantal herself, that made Horace happy when he got the Richardsons as one of his clients. Horace's heart was pounding out of his chest. It was the most excitement he has had in a long time. Horace pulled over very quickly, reached into his pants again, and within moments, little Horace had made a mess all over himself. He didn't care. That was Chapter 2 of The Bedtime Killer by me, Loren Molloy. Now please, make sure to look through the rest of the videos on my channel. I have read from many other books, a variety of sorts. So check those out. Please feel free to share any of my videos, comment and like. Please make sure you subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so that when I go live, you can join me. And as always, I hope you're having a wonderful day, a wonderful evening. And until next time, happy horrors.